Hi, everyone. Welcome to America at its Best. My name is Rebecca Painter, and I'll be your host for today's show. So glad to see all of you here again, back to hear more good news about what you're making possible through your partnership with SPN and this network. So today's topic has been everywhere, from the Wall Street Journal to Saturday Night Live. It's been all over the place. Everybody's talking about it. But I think that our friends at the National Review summed it up best with a recent headline that reads, "How an Albany think tank exposed Andrew Cuomo's coronavirus cover-up." We'll be joined today by the CEO of the Empire Center, Tim Hoefer, to tell us how he broke this devastating story and what it means for New Yorkers going forward. But first, let's check in with the CEO of State Policy Network, Tracy Sharp. Tracy, welcome to the show. I know that this topic really hits home for you personally. Tell us why.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. This story does hit home for me in part because my mom has been locked down in her senior living apartment for nearly a year now in Washington State, a blue state like New York. Now, I'm grateful my mom has received the vaccine. And as worried as we've been, what's also encouraging here is that people living in blue states are getting fed up with state government policies that keep our schools closed, have destroyed businesses, and as we're going to learn today, put lives at risk. And calling out politicians and holding government to account is happening in other blue states as well. In Illinois, the House Speaker Madigan was pressured to resign. And here in the Golden State where I live, Californians will probably gather enough signatures this month to put the governor up for a recall this fall. Wow. So I'm looking forward to hearing the story today about what the Empire Center is doing to hold government accountable and shed light on what's really going on in New York.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. You're right. And we talk a lot about the opportunity in red states in the next 4 years, but there are good things happening and breaking in blue states right now. So with that, let's bring Tim Hoefer to the show. There you are, Tim. Hi.
Hey,
welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, Tim. So let's just start at the beginning. Why did you start looking into the numbers around the deaths in nursing homes in New York?
Well, essentially, like all things Cuomo land, it was mired in controversy and deception and all kinds of bad things. When the governor back in March of 2020 issued an executive order that required nursing homes to accept COVID positive patients back in, which on its face was a weird decision. And then after about a month, when we started looking at the data and they were daily reporting what was coming and going, the Department of Health stopped reporting nursing home deaths in a certain way. So that was curious. And so people were obviously asking, we had asked, the press were asking, all kinds of folks were asking. And it had gotten to a point where the legislature during a testimony had asked Howard Zucker, who's the commissioner of the Department of Health, about it. And his answer was, and he answered some other question. And so our senior fellow for health policy, Bill Hammond, said, well, if they're trying to hide, if they don't want to give it to us, there's obviously something there, let's go after it. So we foiled for it. And of course, as is the case with most things, again, that come out of Cuomo land, they said no. They delayed it. They gave us various versions of why they couldn't give it to us. And then they put out data that was not what we were asking for. And so ultimately, we ended up filing a lawsuit. That lawsuit wound its way through the courts. By the end of October, it had been fully briefed, and it was ready for a decision. And then it sat with the judge until the middle of January. So this is, sort of standard for us, but appalling when you think about it, because it had now been 7 months that we've been actively seeking these data. Clearly they were public. Clearly the Department of Health had been collecting them, and they just didn't want to put them out. So the Attorney General does this report, right? She had to go and collect some of these data from select nursing homes through their own office. Again, data that's already been collected by the Department of Health. And her bombshell report says there could be up to a 50% difference in deaths being reported to what they actually are. we immediately follow up with a letter to the judge in our case and say, come on, like, under what reason are you not giving us this information? We need it right now. Even the Attorney General of the state of New York can't get access to these data that the Department of Health already have.
Which in and of itself is criminal. That's insane that no one can get access to the data.
There's literally no reason for it, right? You rack your brain, you talk about these issues, and you're thinking the whole time, boy, what are they going to say as an excuse?
Mhm.
There's no excuse for what they've done in this case. Judge agreed with us 3 days later, hands down the ruling, says, hand it over, do it in 5 business days. And oh, by the way, pay the Empire Center back for their costs and fees, which in itself is a precedent because that means we have prevailed in a way that is beyond recourse. They're saying not only are you wrong in hiding these data, but you've done it in a way that has like terribly flaunted the law and you've made a huge mistake. So that's a great win. 5 days later, they essentially have handed over all the data.
So what does the data say?
Well, immediately what we see in the data is that there is in fact a 50% difference between what the Department of Health were reporting and what the actual deaths from nursing homes are. The important thing to know is that they didn't lie or hide the amount of people who died from COVID, but they did hide the amount of people who died from COVID that were from a nursing home. And so this had been the pressure point all along was, did this March 25th order to send COVID positive people back to nursing homes result in a higher death count in nursing homes? So immediately we knew they were reporting a number that was lower than what it actually was. A few days later, 2 weeks ago, we do an analysis of these data, statistical analysis, because what we're trying to find out is for months, the Department of Health had been saying there is no statistical significance between the March 25th order and the number of deaths in nursing homes. So we ran it when we finally had the data. And guess what? There is a significant statistical significance between the order on March 25th and the number of deaths in nursing homes.
Wow. So Cuomo's policy decision resulted in many lives being lost, thousands and thousands.
What we know for sure is that it had an impact in COVID positive rates in nursing homes. And we know that at least a few hundred people died as a direct result of it. It could be as many as 1,000 or a few thousand. That's, I mean, harder to know on the math.
So have you been hearing from people who had loved ones in these nursing homes and lost family members?
Yeah, it was kind of amazing because obviously a lot of people have died, and we talk about these things, and this is an exciting opportunity, I think, from the policy perspective and from what we get to do. But this is a really, really terrible thing that has happened. 15,000 people, nursing home residents, died because of COVID so far. So these people were looking for an outlet. They wanted someone to help tell their story. And so as soon as this became public for us, we started getting dozens and dozens of people applying in. Probably the most public has been Janice Dean, who's the chief meteorologist at Fox News. Janice has been a warrior on this, telling the story. In short, her in-laws, both in separate nursing homes in New York, both contracted and then both died from COVID. And so Janice, luckily, has a pulpit where she can tell this story. And she has been very honest, intellectually and emotionally in what has happened, the way that it went down, where the mistakes were made. And she personally holds Andrew Cuomo accountable for this. And so Janice and dozens of people like her who are reaching out to us, who are reaching out to the press and telling their stories, have really helped amplify what the deal is here. And that is, there were data that we were entitled to, that we needed to have access to, that are going to help us learn, that maybe could have saved lives in April and May and June and July, but will definitely help us be better moving forward as we plan for a resurgence of COVID or the next pandemic that comes.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting that you mentioned Janice Dean. One of our viewers, Mary Jo, actually sent in a question before the show saying that Janice Dean flagged this issue back in April or May. And she mentioned that she made note that Governor Cuomo had time to write his memoir and publish it and do all these other things, even won an Emmy. Her big question around all this is, why did it take so long? If everybody, kind of knew this was going on, and you mentioned it took a long time to get the Freedom of Information stuff back, but what's the real problem here?
Well, I think there's a few. That's a lot to unpack. The big problem was that there was this like love affair with Andrew Cuomo, right? He was the guy who was out there who was talking about this, and there are things that he did right, and he was fairly open, and you want to believe that he was working in the best interest of New Yorkers and trying to make all this happen. But the hard questions weren't being asked, and that's why we weren't the first ones to ask for these data. We weren't the first ones to put in a FOIL request. We were the ones who were willing to bring it to court and fight it to the end to make sure we got the answers. This is the standard in Albany, right? You ask these questions, he doesn't answer them, and then they go away. So if we're not fighting hard for it, it's never going to come out.
So let's go back to the fight in the court. You mentioned litigation. This litigation center is a litigation center that you helped start, Tim. Tracy, you've been on this show many times over the last year talking about the litigation muscle in this network and why it matters. So can you guys talk a little bit more about how this really was perhaps a linchpin to this whole thing in New York? And then Tracy, talk a little bit broader about how you see this playing in the future through our network.
Yeah, well, so the Government Justice Center, which is our pro bono litigation firm, was started back in 2017. And then it was because we do a lot of work in open government and transparency issues, and we had essentially been spending the equivalent of a full-time lawyer's salary on filing lawsuits, and we thought to ourselves, maybe we should just hire somebody. And that perfectly aligned with the work that SPN had been doing and sort of thinking about how we build our capacities and make our organizations bigger than just a think tank, that these fights take more than that. So we built off of that, and that's why when we needed it, the Government Justice Center was there to help us get through this litigation.
Yeah, these litigation centers across the states, there's 16 of them. Most of those have been started by state think tanks. It's because, like in the case with Empire, you have the robust research component that Empire provides, the intellectual ammunition to be able to research and get this data and file the FOIAs. Then adding the litigation arm gives it teeth and traction. And it helps build a free market movement, right? The capacities needed in a state for such a time as this, when an especially vulnerable population needed protecting. And you're seeing in other states where they've started C4s, C6 membership organizations, the capacities needed to really speak up and give a voice to those who are not protected, and in this case, this very vulnerable population, and to hold government accountable. I think it's especially poignant that the hubris and hypocrisy here has been, the consequences are coming to the fore, and Empire was ready.
Well, and here's an example in action. I think I saw a headline that the Mackinac Center in Michigan is now suing Governor Whitmer for the same thing. Tim, have you had a hand in connecting with your friends over at the Mackinac Center?
Yeah, so New York wasn't the only state that had this order. The order went down in California, Pennsylvania, Michigan, New Jersey, and maybe some others. And so, in the course of talking to my counterparts and to our friends at Mackinac, really to get advice on some of the things that we were trying to do, they realized that they had an opportunity to go after this too. It was an issue in Michigan, so we compared notes. We connected on data sets, and we connected our lawyers, and hopefully that was helpful. And that's how we sort of leveraged the power of this network.
Yeah, that's awesome. So meanwhile, let's take it back a little bit to this transparency conversation, because part of the reason, back to Mary Jo's question, it took so long is that people aren't being transparent, and they're holding their data close to their chest because it benefits them. So Empire's been working on transparency issues for a long time. Do you want to take this opportunity to share any other big successes you guys have had?
Yeah, we've been banging the drum on transparency for well over a decade at this point. But we see it as sort of a fundamental part of what we do. When we talk about changing the political culture in New York, it starts with knowing what's going on. And that starts with, let me see the data. So I like the most recent example that we've had that's really sort of proof of concept for us is with the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. So the MTA is the transportation system in New York City. Every year we do payroll analysis. First of all, we post it online, and then we do analysis on what these entities are spending. In 2019, that analysis found absurd amounts of overtime in the MTA. Talking about $300,000 per person in overtime, guys that would
Wow.
be working the equivalent of 40 hours of overtime a week or 100 hours of overtime a week. I mean, crazy, right? And so we did our analysis, we pushed it out. It obviously was, super sexy from a media standpoint and got lots of attention. We got over 600 media mentions in the course of a month just on that topic alone. But that led to a federal investigation. That federal investigation first led to a total redo of the MTA's payroll and overtime policies. So the win in that was, well, not only did we get rid of this fraud and abuse of the overtime systems, and ultimately 5 MTA employees were arrested and sent to jail over what had happened, but what they did on the payroll system saves us money. It saves fares. It saves transit riders money. It makes the system better and operate more efficiently. And ultimately, and an operation that's supported by tax dollars, that helps every single New Yorker.
That's awesome. Okay, Tim, so let's take it back to the topic at hand with the nursing homes. And I know you're trying to make everybody more accountable, fight for transparency. I understand that the New York government is in the middle of budget hearings. So are they taking your report seriously with the Department of Health as they're setting budgets moving forward?
Yeah, this is great. So New York has the first budget cycle in the country. Our budget's due on April 1st. So we're right in the thick of it, or we would be if it weren't for all the scandal. So last week at the legislative budget hearings for the Health Committee, Howard Zucker, the commissioner of the Department of Health, was grilled for 4.5 hours during his testimony. And, it's a change certainly in perspective of what it usually is, but the questions went on and on and on and on. The very first question he was asked was about our report. And so this is important because, first of all, it's not every day that we get to be the main topic of this, but it also was the impact that we had with the legislature, that the legislators were asking about this. It wasn't once, it wasn't twice. I mean, it was dozens of times. And so he's asked about the report and the findings about our statistics. And his first response is, well, I'm not sure, I haven't had a chance to review it yet, or something like that. 2 weeks later, right? Again, this is another story that was, this was everywhere. There was no getting away from this. And of course he read it. So about a half an hour later, he gets asked another question, same topic. And he says, something like, well, I have to tell you, I did actually look at it. And, I responded to it at the time, or something like that. It was so interesting because we knew that we had really gotten into this process, that not only is it the people in the press that are paying attention, but that the legislature is now paying attention. And we've got them in a really uncomfortable spot where they're being forced to answer for things that they never have before. This is a really big deal.
Yeah, Rebecca, I just want to emphasize what Empire is doing, that holding government to the highest standards of transparency and accountability, that these are the essential conditions for government to properly function in what is supposed to be a limited role. And what's more, that government should follow the same laws to which private citizens are held. So what they're doing for New Yorkers is to make sure that they receive transparency and due process that they deserve and are entitled to according to the Constitution. So it really is a fundamental service that Empire Center is providing for New Yorkers.
It is. And Tim, I know it's hard work. It should be easy, but it's just not. So I think everybody on the show today appreciates the hard work you guys have been doing for New York and the rest of the country. This has to be a lot to navigate. So 2 questions about people who are rooting for you and on your side. In the state of New York, you mentioned the Attorney General calling for these numbers. Who are some of the other key players who helped you guys get to this point?
Yeah, well, so I mean, obviously the Government Justice Center was a primary partner in all of this. We filed that lawsuit. It was almost immediately an amicus brief was filed by a sitting state senator who wanted these data, right? There were several of them that had been calling for the Department of Health to release it. And so there was a legislative push to start calling for it. Right before the data actually came out, they were talking about subpoenaing the data and going after the Department of Health to force them to make it available. And then there were several groups. Janice Dean was a great buoy for us to get this out and get more attention for it. The press and the associations that go with it were right on our side. This is a natural issue for them, both on the COVID side, but also on the open government side of things. So there really, it was a lot of people, and everybody sort of saw it, and it's like everything was kind of at the right timing, and the situation was good, and this is where we ended up.
And so all of a sudden, Empire Center's on the map, making national news. We talk a lot at SPN, especially with our supporters, about the power of peer groups, about CEOs being able to call each other while they're in the flames of the fire. But it's sometimes hard to tell that story without it being a firsthand account. Can you tell us how that's helped you through this?
Yeah, this is a lot, right? All of a sudden we go from running our everyday business to fielding calls from all over the country and everybody you can think of. And we know this is a big opportunity for us. So one of the very first things I did was lean on my peer group. I've got a peer group of 6 or 7 CEOs across the network. We meet a few times a year, thanks to SPN, who put this together and sort of helped us build really strong relationships with one another. And I very honestly went to them and was like, I'm terrified of missing something and I need you guys. And within a matter of, Tracy, it was like within 2 days, we had a call set up. These guys devoted over an hour to helping me talk through the issues, see the opportunities. Tracy and Lynn were both there. It's the kind of stuff that we need in a time just like this. We spend a lot of time building relationships and getting to know one another in our organizations and learning from each other. And we do that every day, every week, for all the years we've been doing it. But it was this situation when I needed everybody and I needed their full firepower. And I got it. And it's not always kind, but it's always really honest. And it was really helpful. It was a focusing event for me. It helped us really buckle down on what we needed to do. There were things we hadn't thought of that we now are focused on and working on to make sure we get everything we need out of this.
Yeah, Rebecca, there was one particular call with this peer group. It was like a SWAT team gathering. The collective experience and knowledge of these CEOs from different states who can speak really plainly to each other, hit them right between the eyes because they've forged relationships and there's a certain degree of trust that they really are trying to help each other succeed. In the whole event, that call and the subsequent calls really served as an accelerant to help Tim and his team take it to the next level. But everyone in the network learns as well. And we here at SPN learn, okay, next time we'll do this and that. But in the meantime, let's help Tim make the most of this opportunity.
Good. All right. Well, with that, let's move over to Q&A from the audience. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get started. 2 questions from Paul, who has tuned into the show. The first, he mentions that the New York Attorney General claimed the data is off by at least 50%. And your claim seems a little more modest. Is she exaggerating?
So there's various versions of the data. Now, 50% is about right. So the original data from the Department of Health said that there were roughly 9,000 deaths that they could attribute to nursing homes. The Department of Health released subsequent data after the Attorney General's report, and then the full data set after the court ordered them to. That number is now somewhere up around 16,000. So yeah, it's a little over 50%. That was the difference. And again, it wasn't the deaths that they were hiding, it was the deaths of nursing home residents and where those deaths occurred. That was the issue at hand.
Okay. Next question from Ed Johnson. What transparency initiatives should be pursued to ensure state government agencies are serving their constituents? Well, we had a wish list.
Oh, and I do. This is one of those, we think about the exposure that we've gotten and what Empire Center is going to be able to do with this. That's directly one of the things. So there is an opportunity right now, while everybody is listening and paying attention, for us to get our dream transparency legislation in. And so we're working right now to get that sort of fine-tuned and to find sponsors on both sides of the aisle. This is definitely a nonpartisan issue in terms of anything that's going to happen in state government. And we're going to work really hard to get that done. This is step one to changing and winning that political culture.
Yeah, Rebecca, this network really has a long reputation for transparency. Since 2009, 10, 11, most of the state think tanks in this network did something on transparency, whether it's what Empire did, which was a full-on website, See Through New York, to expose some of these salaries and where taxpayer dollars are going to in government, how they're being used. But a lot of transparency legislation came out of that cycle a decade ago and is still bearing fruit, but there's just so much more work to be done, which is why the litigation centers are helpful as well. So I think Empire has been especially adept at this. They have the digital footprint with the website and the litigation center to really bring this to fruition.
Yeah. Well, and so next question, and here's a big one for you, Tim. What's next for Empire? Where do you go from here? You guys are making national headlines.
Yeah, well, hopefully up and up is where we go. So, we're going to have these short-term legislative issues that we get to work on, like transparency. There's a natural opening to start talking about ethics in government and how we solve some of those problems. But long-term, this is about building our organizations and our allied organizations so that we're one of the primary players in New York, and we have a great opportunity to do that right now. So we'll be focusing immediately as of last week on beginning to build those audiences, finding all those people who are listening to us, bringing them into the fold, and letting them become educated New Yorkers who are talking about and caring about all the same things we are. And then we leverage that, right? The power of our organizations, the power of these people who really do care and just need an in. We leverage that to get the change that we need. And that's the big stuff that's going to save New York.
And as a follow-up question, this is a great question, by the way. What does Tim need most right now? And does he have personal security?
So when this first happened, I started joking, and I think I said this to Tracy too. If you can't find me, start with Andrew Cuomo's office. And if I'm not there, talk to my wife, because she's a saint, but at some point she's going to get tired of me, right? This for us, it's about scaling. We've done, I think, what is the really hard work of building the infrastructure, doing this sort of coalition and allied organization building with the help of SBN. It's all there. At this point, we need to, as my friend Daniel Erspamer says, we need to fuel up the tanks. We need to just scale all these programs up and take as much advantage of this exact moment in time as we can. And so we're hoping to sort of double down, both from an organizational capacity, but also to bring in a lot of resources to help us just go for the next couple of months as hard as we can.
Good.
But no, I don't have personal security yet.
Hopefully you won't need it. I don't know. I'm in South Carolina. New York can be kind of a tough place, I hear. All right, guys. Well, we are reaching the end of our time together. Tracy, any parting thoughts? And then Tim, we'll turn to you.
Yeah, there's a great quote I came across from Mark Miller. He's the vice president of high performance leadership at Chick-fil-A, and he's an author of books on leadership. But he said, quote, "Don't confuse opportunity with leadership. Others control many of our opportunities, so that should not be our concern. We control our readiness." And this gets back to what this network steadfastly works to uphold in every state, that policy can deeply affect people's lives and livelihoods. And we must always be ready to hold government accountable. As I mentioned, my mom is in senior living, and our family has been extra vigilant to monitor her condition and well-being, and someone has to look out for her. And someone needs to be a watchdog on the government policies that have kept her in lockdown, kept schools closed, and destroyed businesses. So, just to wrap up, this is why this 50-state network is so important: to watch out for the well-being of the little guy, to protect our right to earn a living, and to hold government accountable. So I applaud Empire. Tim has been at this a long time and worked very hard to pull together, to be ready for such a time as this, to really serve the people of New York. And we thank him.
As well said. Tim, any parting words before we go?
We get asked often if we're excited that we got the governor. And who knows what's going to happen with Andrew Cuomo over the coming weeks. That's not what this was, right? Ultimately, this started with, as Tracy said, we have a right to see what's happening in our government, to have access to these data, to push back and ask hard questions. And so that's what this is all built from. That's what we're working towards. The reason we're able to do this is because of that hard work we've done over the last 10 or 12 years to get not only to change the culture of transparency and open government, but build our organizations. We obviously couldn't have done that without SPN, with everything they do for us now. For what they did for us when we first started out, I think we were one of the first organizations to go through the new think tank startup program, which is awesome. And I'll tell you, I was terrified then, more so than I am now, about what was coming up. And that's how we got through it. And we did this together, right? This isn't just about what we did or just about what SPN has done or what Andrew Cuomo did. It's a combination of all of those things. And the fact that we're here and ready to take advantage means that ultimately we're getting closer to winning, which means we're going to have a better New York where people can be successful, where they can live and be prosperous, and where our families don't leave. And that helps all of us. That helps the whole country. So we're really thankful, grateful for the support that we've had to this point, and excited for what's coming the next couple of weeks, months, and years for Empire and for New York.
Thanks, Tim. And thank you, Tracy. And thank you to all of you who tuned in today. We talk about policy and it's such an intellectual battle all of the time. And this is such a good reminder that it's more than intellectual. Policy really is about people's lives. It is life or death. It's about their livelihoods. It's about so much more than just winning or saying you got a bill passed. And this really drives home the importance. And for those of you tuning in today, I hope it reminds you that it doesn't matter if you live in a red state or a blue state. Your partnership with this network means anything is possible, and we are going to win no matter where we are. So thank you all for making that happen. Thank you, Tim, to you and your team. You guys are doing awesome work, and we can't wait to see what you bring to New York and the rest of the country in the days to come. So please tune in, join us in April. We'll be in touch with the topic of the next show. If you have ideas, please let us know what you'd like to learn about. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.